Welcome to Over the Hill Outdoors. In this video, I'll be exploring a route of the famous 19th century mountain man and fur trapper named Jim Bridger, who first explored the Bear River from near its source all the way to the Great Salt Lake. Nearly a dozen years ago, I set out to canoe the lower 170 miles or so of that river to experience for myself some of what the famous mountain man would have seen and felt. The Bear River begins high in the Uintah Mountains on the Utah-Wyoming border, then flows north-northwest and then southwest through 3 states for a total of approximately 500 miles before it empties into the Great Salt Lake. It is reportedly the longest river in North America that does not ultimately reach the ocean. In 1824, Jim Bridger was put in charge of a party to explore the Bear River and its side streams in search of a new beaver trapping area. So, beginning in southwestern Wyoming, he followed the river for over 400 miles to its end at a very large body of water. And there, to his great surprise, he discovered the water was salty. He concluded that he had reached the Pacific Ocean. Today, some credit Bridger as the first non-Native American to ever have seen the Great Salt Lake. I've broken up my river exploration into 6 main sections: the Gem Valley, Oneida Narrows, Cache Valley North Half, Cache Valley South Half, and the Bear River Valley North and South Halves. And in each one of these sections, I will give you some brief glimpses of what the river and its surroundings look like. And I'll warn you ahead of time, this is not an entertainment video, and it will not be very interesting to most people. But for those few modern-day adventurers planning their own discovery of the Bear River, I think it will be very helpful. My adventure began in the Gem Valley of Idaho. This is a section of river that runs approximately 17.5 river miles from just west of the town of Niter, Idaho, to the Oneida Reservoir Inlet. The put-in site I used is just below the Cove Powerhouse, and the first few miles were quite shallow, requiring us to get out and pull the canoe in a few places. But most of the river after that is deep enough to float easily. It's very relaxing. We averaged between 3 and 4 miles per hour through most of it. On one of my floats, I camped on an island in this section of river with permission from the private landowner. This is a beautiful, peaceful, clear water section of river. It's free of rapids. It runs through a valley of nice green grasslands and gently rolling hills. At the end of this float are several convenient takeout spots at the head of the Oneida Reservoir. At the south end of the Gem Valley, the river enters into a relatively narrow 12-mile long canyon section. The first 4 to 5 miles is reservoir, followed by a half-mile portage from the dam to the closest put-in access point. From there, for the next 7+ miles, the river can be relatively fast-moving, with some areas of Class 1 to Class 2 rapids that I would not recommend for beginners. More than once I've seen a crushed, abandoned canoe wrapped around a big boulder in the middle of the river. I should mention that the river water level can fluctuate greatly and quickly in this section, and it depends on the amount of water being released from the Oneida Dam. I've seen the water level raise more than 2 feet in less than 30 minutes at times when the electricity demands are high. There are 2 what I call low dam water diversion structures along this section of river below the reservoir. I've heard of a few people passing over the top one, but I would not recommend it, and the second one definitely requires a portage. At the end, there is a very easy, convenient takeout spot where the river goes under what they call the Mink Creek Bridge. Section 3 I call the Cache Valley North or Cache Valley, Idaho portion. It's approximately 28 river miles from Mink Creek Bridge down to the Utah-Idaho border. The land on both sides of the river here is mostly private, so river access for launching and taking out can be limited. But there are 5 highway bridges that cross the river, and at those bridges it's possible to access the river while staying within the highway right-of-way public access area. The first 5 miles down to Highway 34 is a scenic, relatively fast stretch of river lined with big cottonwood trees, willows, and box elder trees. My speed through this first 5 miles usually averaged around 5 to 6 miles per hour. There are a few minor rapids, but nothing serious. However, there is one canal diversion structure near the end of this first 5 miles that may require a short portage. One of the times I floated this stretch, I was with a group of older Boy Scouts and their leaders, and they chose to float over the diversion rather than portage their canoes around it. Most made it fine, but not everyone. They got wet, but everyone was safe. The river in the remaining 23 miles of Section 3 is considerably slower, passing through mostly undeveloped agricultural land. Overall, it's very relaxing, very interesting scenery, no natural rapids, and very little paddling is required. There are 3 irrigation diversion structures along this lower section. The first 2 don't require a portage. In many places, the riverbank is lined with Russian olive trees. Though an invasive species, they offer their own unique beauty to the landscape. And there are a handful of small islands along the way that offer an opportunity to stop, stretch your legs, or take a peaceful lunch break. And also, between Highway 91 and the Dayton Bridge, there are a couple of undeveloped natural hot springs. There is a notable change in water quality as you work your way down this section of river. What starts out as a relatively clear, fast-flowing river eventually becomes quite muddy and slow, and it's not uncommon to see cattle along the way, sometimes even in the river. By far the most treacherous part of this float is the last irrigation diversion structure and its associated rapids near the end of the section. Be safe and portage your canoe around this one for sure. The 4th section of river I call the Cache Valley South, or the Utah portion of Cache Valley. It's approximately 44 river miles between the Utah-Idaho border and the Cutler Reservoir Dam. The first 30 miles are very much like the river was in the last 10 miles of the Idaho side. The river south of the Idaho border is slow, lots of big bends, no rapids. It's a very leisurely float. You can figure on 2 to 3 miles per hour, depending on how much paddling you want to do. The river parallels the Bear River mountain range, which has peaks up to 10,000 feet in elevation. It's a beautiful mountain range. As a side note, you may have noticed buckets of water in my canoe in some of the previous photos. Many sections of the river I floated alone, and I found that buckets of water provided better balance and stability. It was like having a second person with me in the front seat. Like most other sections of the river, this one flows through mostly private land, and public access therefore is limited primarily to the bridges. This old classic metal bridge is called the Morton Bridge. It's a very easy launch and takeout site. Here's a typical view in the Utah portion of Cache Valley below the Morton Bridge, and this one is below the Trenton Bridge. There are a few nice places to camp along the way. Just be sure to check on the land ownership ahead of time and get any necessary permission. One of the most interesting historical features along this section of river is at the mouth of the Cub River, where it meets the Bear. Be sure to stop here on the west side to check it out. It is one of Jim Bridger's 1824 campsites, and also the probable location of the 1826 Mountain Man Rendezvous, the first one to be held in Cache Valley. Below this monument, the river flows slowly for another dozen or so miles to a very easy takeout spot in the community of Benson, Utah. This is an especially peaceful and relaxing stretch of river with plenty of opportunity to see a variety of birds and perhaps other wildlife if you keep quiet. Then at the end there is a developed and well-maintained launch and takeout facility just above the Benson Bridge with parking, a small floating dock, and public restrooms. The last 14 miles of this float through the Cache Valley from the Benson Bridge to Cutler Dam is the slowest river section of all. The first 5 or 6 miles is still a recognizable river channel, but the rest is flooded marshland, quiet backwaters, and an open, shallow reservoir created by the dam. This is an easy, peaceful float, suited to just about any age or skill level. It's one of my favorite portions of the Bear River. It is scenic and interesting in its own way. There is a lot of flexibility in takeout options, depending on how much time and energy you want to spend. I generally take out at the Newton Bridge, but the Clay Slough access, the Benson Marina, and the lower Bear River Overlook are other public access alternatives. This is a popular waterfowl and pheasant hunting area, so you can expect to see a variety of birds and other wetland wildlife along the way. Near the midpoint of this float, there is a big island that can make for a very nice secluded camping spot. I've stayed here a couple of times and I really enjoyed it. If you like camping isolation, marsh wildlife, sights and sounds, and beautiful sunsets, this one is for you. There is essentially no current in the reservoir portion, so the last several miles are all paddling. When you pass under a railroad bridge, you'll know you're near the end. The takeout point itself is a public launch ramp at the Newton Cache Junction Bridge. There are no additional takeout options in the 3+ miles beyond this bridge toward the Cutler Dam itself, so if you decide to explore that portion of the reservoir, you'll have to return to this point to get out. I call this next section of river the Upper Bear River Valley. This section is approximately 30 river miles long, ending at either the Bear River City Bridge or the Honeyville Bridge. It's a very relaxing and relatively slow stretch of river with no rapids and no canal diversion structures to negotiate. There are several public access sites to put in or take out of the river between the dam and Bear River City, so it's not necessary to float it all in one trip. The first takeout point is called Hampton Ford. It's about 5 miles below the dam. In the mid-1800s, there was a ferry that operated here. Eventually, the ferry was replaced by a bridge, known locally as the Bigler Bridge, and it functioned until the late 1900s. The river here resembles very much many of the Cache Valley sections of river, except that it's down in its own valley bottom, created by millennia of river erosion. So even though the river flows through a relatively developed agricultural area of farms and small communities, you don't see or hear much evidence of it as you float along. My average speed along the entire section was between 2 and 4 miles per hour, depending on river flow rate for the day. Which brings up an important point. The biggest limiting factor for floating this section of river and the next one is water level. If outflow from Cutler Dam is less than, say, about 75 cubic feet per second, it's probably going to be necessary to get out and pull your canoe through several of the shallow sections. The next public access point is the bridge between Deweyville and Tremonton, about 11 more river miles below the Hampton Ford. This is an undeveloped but vehicle accessible launch or takeout spot, even for small motorized boats. From here, the river winds for another 7+ miles to the next public access point, which is called Hanson Park. The river gets slower and slower as you continue down from here. Along the way, though you cannot see it from the water, there is another reminder of Jim Bridger and his exploration of the river. The takeout option I chose on this day was the Bear River City Bridge, which is about 33 miles below Cutler Dam. This last section of river, ultimately ending at the Great Salt Lake, is between 39 and 45 miles long, depending on which route you choose for the last few miles after you enter the Bear River Bird Refuge. River flow between Bear River City and the refuge tends to be very slow and requires near constant paddling. And once inside the refuge, there is essentially no current at all in some of the areas. Be sure to check river flow rates before any trip on this river, but especially if you're planning to float these lower sections. This is the website I used to see real-time water levels at various key checkpoints along the way. If water levels are too low, you could end up pulling your canoe for miles. And there are only a couple of public access points along this section of river. After the Bear River City Bridge, there's nothing until the town of Corinne, and beyond that, you'll have to go all the way to the Bear River Bird Refuge Road for your next takeout option. Scenery in the first few miles of this section is similar to what you've experienced in the previous river section, but once you get past the Highway 83 bridge at the town of Corinne, the landscape is just flat and wide open. What few trees and shrubs you'll see for the rest of the trip are either salt cedar, also known as tamarisk, or Russian olive. I ended my canoe trek at the east edge of the Bear River Bird Refuge, near the refuge's maintenance shop area, several miles short of my goal to reach actual saltwater. And two factors kept me from completing my goal. One was refuge regulations that prohibit boat travel of any kind within the refuge except in a few areas during the fall waterfowl hunting season. And the second was low water levels in the Great Salt Lake itself, resulting in the shoreline being several miles beyond the outer edge, the western edge of the refuge boundaries. So this is still on my bucket list to complete this last section of Jim Bridger's adventure, but I'll need to wait for the right conditions. If you beat me to it, here is some information that I think you'll find helpful. I've checked with the refuge managers, and there are at least 3 possible canoe routes through the refuge that are allowed during the fall hunting season. One is along the canal that separates the Refuge Management Unit number 1 and 2, traveling from the public boat launch at the refuge maintenance shop area out to the West Dike. The second is down a narrow remnant branch of the Bear River through the middle of Unit 2, from the shop area again down to the southern dike. And the third is along the canal that separates Refuge Management Units 2 and 3 from the shop area down to the south dike. Then, once you reach the outer dike, and if water flow from the refuge is adequate, and if the Salt Lake water level itself is high enough, there are 2 routes that will get you to saltwater, and ultimately to a public access point meant primarily for airboats and accessed by way of Promontory Point. So, thank you for watching. If you ever decide to float some or all of the Bear River, I'll be glad to share with you a couple of documents that I've created that might help. One is a summary of my personal river notes, and the other is an illustrated description of numerous put-in and take-out sites along the lower 200 miles of this river. Just email me a request and I'll send them to you. In the meantime, enjoy the outdoors and be safe.